there, it's Lisa Wienhold. I'm the principal flutist in the Alabama Symphony, and I teach as well. And I thought I'd take just a little bit of time and talk about how I work and how I try and get my students to work on technical problems, on note issues. In pieces, sometimes we have a bunch of notes that are either too fast for us to play right off or an awkward combination of fingerings. And how do we get better at doing those things? How do we practice them? And the short answer to that is repetition. We just play them a lot because we need a lot of repetition to cement in the muscle memory in our fingers. I'm sure most of you type on a keyboard or text on a phone, and I'm betting that all of you are super fast at that. And that's because you've done it a lot, and there's a lot of repetition built into those patterns for your fingers. So we need to build that repetition pattern into our fingers for any particular hard spot in music. Now, one of the ways that's kind of a shortcut, and so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, is if you really practice your scales and arpeggios. And I know they aren't the most fun things to do always. I kind of like them because I guess I'm a little bit of a weirdo, but doing them gives you a lot of the patterns that will show up over and over and over again in music. It's like having vocabulary to be able to write a paper or to read a book. It would be awfully hard to write a paper in the English language if you didn't know the word the, or the word there, or the word cat or dog. And these scales are your vocabulary in music in the same way, so that you know when you see a scale pattern in a piece of music, and you can just go, oh, well, that's a B flat major scale. I know that already. I've already learned that. So that's why we have you work on scales and on arpeggios. It's not because we like to torture you. Really, it's because in the long run, it's going to help you be faster at learning pieces. Okay, so you do that, you're good about it. Now, you have a piece or a part of a piece that's really giving you trouble playing-wise. And how do you work on that? Well, the first thing I'd say is make sure that you're not trying to work on too big of a chunk of music at a time. If you have a whole page that's super hard to play, don't try and work on that whole page at once, because I find what happens is that people will start at the top of the page and play through part of it, and then they get partway through and they make a mistake and they go, oh, okay, I'm going to go back, I'm going to try it again. And they go back to the top of the page or back to the first part of the passage and play it. And what happens is that first part gets really good because you've repeated a lot, but the middle part and the end part might not be so good because you haven't worked on it as much as you need to. So break it into smaller chunks, a few measures, or sometimes even a measure at a time, and work on those smaller chunks and then kind of patch them all together. And if you do that, you'll be able to play the whole page or the whole passage. But if you just kind of try and work on the whole passage, it can be a little daunting too. But if you just have a measure or two at a time, I can do that. Okay. So we talked about needing to get in those repetitions, and I've had teachers over the years who have said, well, I think the best way to do it is just to repeat it a bunch of times until you can play it 5 times in a row without a mistake. And that's not a bad thing to say, because that's fairly true. I find, though, that 5 repetitions through may not be enough, and you might have to do a few more repetitions to where you can get to that. But I think it also encourages us to be a little bit mindless about how we're practicing. We're just repeating things, and we're not really engaging our brain in what we're doing. And it's kind of boring, I think. So what I do is, when I have found I've identified a smaller passage to work on, I will do some variations on it. And that gets the repetitions in, but it also makes my brain work a little bit to do those variations. So the very first thing I would say is, when you've identified that passage, in this case I'm just going to play a measure of 8/8 notes. And it starts on a B flat and it ends on a B flat. And it seems like that would be a B flat major scale, but in this case it's not. It's in the key of A flat, which has 4 flats, B, E, A, and D. And in this little pattern, they've thrown in, of course, the D flat that's in the key signature, and then a D natural, and there's an A flat. So for me, I have to, because I know my B flat major scale so well, I kind of have to work on this a little bit because it's not what I'm expecting it to be. So I'm going to play it super slowly and really correctly to make sure that I'm playing the right notes. I might have written in some accidentals just to make sure that I don't play the wrong thing. Okay, so here it is. Okay, we got it. All right. So the first little variation I'm going to do is to sort of change up the rhythm. Instead of playing even eighth notes, I'm going to play kind of a dotted rhythm on them. And that's going to be sort of long, short, long, short. So here's that. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is flip that around. I'm going to do the reverse of that. Short, long, short, long, short, long. And that can sometimes be a little tricky because that's not a rhythm that we play a ton. Okay, so here's that. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do, I kind of like doing because I think it's sort of fun. Instead of playing from the beginning to the end of that little passage, I'm going to start at the end and play back to the beginning. I had an English teacher who used to have us proofread our papers and our essays, the lines of text by going backwards through each line rather than left to right like we normally read. And you can catch typos a lot that way, or misspellings because you're kind of forced to look at every word rather than just glossing over the pattern of it. And so in music, I think that's the same thing. If we're forced to read backwards, it makes us look at each note a little bit more. So here we go. Really sounds funny that way. Okay, this is a passage where I have two groups of 4 eighth notes each. So it's grouped in 4s in a duple rhythm, in 2s or in 4s. And so I'm going to put it into a triple rhythm. I'm just going to group it in 3s instead. If you had something that was in 3s, you could put it into 2s or 4s. Just sort of change up how the notes are organized together. So I'm going to start out, and if there are slurs on the notes, you can take them out because that can sometimes get confusing. In this case, it's all tongued anyway, so it's fine. I'm just going to play them in groups of 3. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to play 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to accent just a little bit at the beginning of each group of 3 to point that out. Okay, so here we go. Okay, now I started right on a group of 3. So this next one I'm going to do, I'm going to make the first note a pickup actually to a group of 3. So it's going to change where those groups of 3 fall. So here we go. And a lot of times it's going to come out unevenly, like you need another note to make it right. But that's just because we're grouping it differently. Good. And now I'm going to do 2 pickup notes to a group of 3. And that came out evenly, so it made me feel good. Okay, so the very next thing that I will try and do is go back to those groups of 4. And in those groups of 4, I'm going to put a little bit of a hold on the first note of each group of 4, a little bit of a fermata. The other notes I'll still play in tempo, but I'll just kind of hold that first note. So that's like this. Okay. Second note, I can do the same thing. I can hold the second note. I can hold the third note. I bet you guys know where this is going. I can hold the fourth note. Okay, so this passage happens to be all articulated, all tongued. I find a lot of times if I have a passage that has slurs in it, taking out the slurs and tonguing everything will, again, kind of like reading backwards through the line, will really make you concentrate on each note and know that you're playing each note correctly. In this case, it's already tongued, but maybe I'll just kind of throw a couple of slurs in on the first 2 of each group of 4 for fun, just to do it a little bit different way. So here we go. The very last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play it one more time exactly as written with whatever slurs or tonguing or articulation is there. I'm still going to play it slowly though. I'm going to just play it one more time exactly as it's written, no variations. Okay, and then I know that the tempting thing is to try and play it fast and see if all of this work that you've done, because it's work, has paid off. And I would encourage you to not do that. Let it just sit with being very correct, and then come back to it the next day. And then when you first start practicing it the next day, sure, try it fast. See if you can play it. Let me see. I'm going to pretend. Jump cut. We're at the next day. Okay, I'm going to see if I can play this yet. So here we go. And I can. So great. But if I couldn't, don't be too discouraged. Just go back and keep doing the same repetitions with variations that you've done the first day. A lot of times with pieces and parts of pieces, I will have to do that several days in a row. And even right up to the concert time, sometimes as I'm warming up for the concert, I'll revisit some of those variations just to kind of re-cement it in. Now, I think if you said to yourself, not that you're going to try and repeat this 5 times, but maybe say to yourself, I'm going to repeat it 10 times when I'm practicing it without any of the variations. You might be a better practicer than me, but I think I'm probably likely to get bored and not do that. And I don't think my mind will be very engaged in it. And I just think that that lends itself to a practice that's not as efficient as it could be. And if we go back and count how many times we did this in this little section, I think it's kind of surprising. We played it once correctly, just slowly and correctly. We played it once with the long, short, long, short. We played it short, long, short, long. We played it backwards. We played it in groups of 3, pickup to groups of 3, 2 pickups to groups of 3. Excuse me. We stopped on the first, second, third, fourth note of each group of 4, the way that it's written. We changed up the articulations, and we played it one more time just to see how it, oh, my doggie is barking in her sleep. So if you try all of those different variations, I think you'll find that you can get pretty quick at doing them. And when I'm working on things, she's chasing rabbits, I think. When I'm working on them, I can do all of this in kind of under a minute's time because it's a sort of a second nature to me to do that. And it can get to be that way for you. Now, do you have to do all those variations every single time? No, maybe you try doing the uneven ones and maybe the stopping and holding on each group of 4 or some of them. You don't have to do all of them every time, but I think that if you start incorporating some of that technique in trying to practice hard things, I think you'll find that your those hard passages will come along fairly quickly and it won't be as frustrating to try and learn them. So I hope this has helped a little bit, and happy practicing. Bye.